The wind was vicious that night. It screamed across the barren landscape, rattling the thin metal walls of Jonas's shelter. Outside, snow-like dust swirled in chaotic patterns, hiding what little visibility there was. Jonas huddled closer to the flickering fire, rubbing his hands together, trying to feel any warmth at all. It had been another long day of scavenging, another day spent running across frozen fields to find anything edible, anything useful. Every sound seemed louder in the dark, the snap of metal, the howl of the wind, even his own heartbeat. He had lived alone for years, learning to survive on the edges of human space. People called him stubborn, reckless, even insane, but Jonas didn't care. He knew survival required patience, careful observation, and a constant readiness for danger. That was life now, life on the fringe. Then came the sound, a soft, uneven footstep. Jonas froze, every muscle taut. His rifle was already in his hands, pointed toward the door. The sound came again, faint, deliberate. Someone or something was outside. Fear prickled at his skin. He had not expected visitors. Not tonight, not ever. The door creaked, slowly, deliberately. Jonas's heart slammed against his chest. "Who's there?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The wind outside drowned him almost immediately, but he had no choice. Whoever it was could have weapons, or worse, could be dangerous. And then she appeared. Jonas blinked, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. A girl, no, not a human girl. Her skin shimmered faintly under the flickering light of the fire, silver with a soft glow, almost like liquid moonlight. Her eyes were gold, glowing softly, large and curious, reflecting both wonder and mischief. She stood in the doorway, silent, her presence commanding yet somehow unthreatening. Jonas's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" His voice trembled despite himself. The girl didn't answer immediately. She simply stepped inside, her movements graceful, smooth and precise. The metal floor made a tiny squeak under her feet, but she didn't flinch. She looked around the shelter at the small fire, at the meager supplies stacked against the wall, and then back at Jonas. She tilted her head as if the question itself was irrelevant. Jonas tightened his grip on the rifle. He had seen aliens before in reports and old records, but never like this. Never one that seemed so human, yet not human at all. He could see the outline of her ears, slightly pointed, the subtle luminescence of her skin, the faint lines running across her arms like delicate circuitry, and yet she did not seem dangerous. She did not seem to want anything, at least not in a way he could understand. "Why are you here?" he asked, trying to keep calm, trying to understand. She walked closer, slow and deliberate. Jonas instinctively took a step back, but she didn't stop. She reached out a hand and touched the wall, then the fire, then a small bundle of food he had collected. She was studying everything, not touching destructively, not stealing, just observing. Finally, she spoke. One word, soft, almost trembling, cold. Jonas blinked. "That was it?" That was all she said? Cold? He looked at her, his rifle still raised, confusion battling curiosity. "You came all the way here because of the cold?" She shrugged lightly, her eyes glimmering, and sat down on the floor as if she had lived here forever. Jonas's mind raced. He should have thrown her out. He should have screamed at her to leave. This was dangerous, reckless. He could not trust anyone. He had learned that the hard way, but she looked so small, so fragile, so human in a way no one else had been for years. The firelight caught her skin and made it shine like silver, but her hands trembled slightly from the cold. The wind outside shrieked like a wild animal, and Jonas suddenly realized that the shelter felt emptier before she arrived. He didn't understand it. He didn't want to understand it. He was a survivor, not a fool. But something in her gaze, something in the quiet certainty of her presence softened him. He lowered the rifle slightly, though he didn't put it down. "You can't just stay," he said finally, his voice low, wary. The girl didn't argue. She didn't even look upset. She only smiled, faint and almost human, and settled herself closer to the fire. Her glow seemed to warm the small room more than the fire itself. Jonas sank to the floor on the other side of the fire, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Alone for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to share a space with someone. Even if she wasn't human, even if she was a stranger, even if the rules of survival screamed at him not to trust her, Jonas felt a tiny flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. and for the first time in a long time, the cold outside didn't feel quite as unbearable. Morning light crept slowly through the small frost-covered window. Jonas stirred, his body aching from a night of restless sleep. He was used to being alone, used to silence, but now the faint sound of breathing made him pause. The girl, she was still there, sitting by the fire, her hands resting on her knees, watching him. Her eyes caught the sunlight and shimmered, golden and alive. Jonas blinked, unsure what to feel. He had spent years avoiding strangers, trusting no one. Yet somehow this alien girl made the world feel different, less lonely, less harsh. And that frightened him. He cleared his throat. You stayed the night," he said, his voice rough. She tilted her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Warm," she said simply. No pride, no excuse, no attempt to explain herself further. Just the single word. Jonas felt a strange tug in his chest. He realized that sometimes words weren't necessary to understand someone. Jonas got up, stretching, and moved toward the small water basin. She followed, mimicking his movements silently. Every gesture she made was precise, graceful yet curious, as if she was learning about the world for the first time. Jonas's heart twisted at the thought. How had she survived alone in this harsh space? How could someone so small, so seemingly delicate, have the courage to come into a stranger's shelter without fear? "You shouldn't just come into someone's home," Jonas said carefully, not wanting to scare her. His rifle was at his side, but he didn't raise it. He didn't need to. Somehow he trusted her enough to speak honestly. The girl looked at him, those glowing golden eyes steady. "Home, cold, needed warmth," she said, her voice soft, deliberate. She did not act afraid or apologetic. She acted like she belonged. And that unsettled Jonas more than any enemy ever could. Jonas swallowed. She wasn't human. She didn't follow human rules. And yet there was something familiar in her manner, a spark of understanding that made his chest tighten. He sat down again by the fire, letting her gestures and presence sink in. For the first time in years, he felt he wasn't entirely alone. Then came the small noises outside. Jonas's instincts immediately sharpened. The wind carried something else with it, a soft crunch of movement, something deliberate, not natural. His hand went to the rifle again. The girl noticed. She didn't panic. Instead, she reached out, brushing her hand against his arm. He froze at the touch. It was gentle, grounding, almost like she was telling him to trust her. Jonas's mind raced. Danger might be coming, and yet he felt calmer than he had in years. The crunching grew louder. A scavenger drone, most likely, or worse, a pack of them. Jonas had fought humans before, rogue groups looking for food, water, and supplies. But he had never faced alien threats on his own. His pulse quickened. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. She nodded once, silently, and stepped closer. She didn't hide. She didn't run. She just waited. The drone appeared, metallic and menacing, its sensors glowing red. Jonas fired, but the weapon had limited range. The drone advanced relentlessly, its mechanical movements precise and unfeeling. Then the girl moved. Jonas didn't understand at first. Her hand flashed in the air, a faint silver light stretching like liquid around her fingers. The drone twisted, sparks flying, and then fell apart in silence. Another drone followed, and another, all falling before she moved a single hand. Jonas's mouth fell open. You did that?" he whispered, awe and fear mingling in his voice. She turned to him, eyes glowing, expression calm. "Protect," she said simply. No explanation, no boasting. Just the one word. Jonas stared at her. The realization hit him like a hammer. This girl, this stranger, was extraordinary. Not human, yes, but brave, intelligent, compassionate. And somehow she had chosen to protect him. The wind died down. Silence returned. The fire crackled, the room warm and safe. Jonas looked at her, and for the first time he didn't feel the cold of the world pressing down on him. He felt connection, trust, something fragile, new and terrifying. He realized slowly, painfully, that this small alien girl had done more than just enter his shelter. She had opened a door in his life he didn't know existed, a door to companionship, to hope, to something greater than mere survival. And for the first time in years, Jonas allowed himself to wonder, maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to survive alone anymore. Days passed, and Jonas found himself watching the girl more than he wanted to admit. She had not left the shelter, though he never said she could stay. Yet somehow she moved around as if it was always her home. She organized his scattered supplies, tended the small fire, and even tried to clean the corners he had long ignored. Jonas had lived alone for years. Everything in his life was his way, precise and ordered. And yet somehow he didn't mind her rearranging things. She was graceful in everything she did, every movement flowing, deliberate yet natural. When she mimicked his gestures, trying to carry water or gather food, he realized she was learning, observing every small detail. Her curiosity was endless, and it reminded him painfully of how long he had been alone. No one had watched him work. No one had cared how he survived. She did in her quiet, strange way. Jonas had never been one to speak about himself. Sharing feelings, memories, fears, they were dangerous things and he had learned to lock them away. But sometimes when the night came and the wind howled outside, he caught her watching him, waiting silently. He began talking quietly at first, about how he had ended up alone, about the dangers outside, about the small victories of each day. And somehow she listened. Not just listened, she understood. Her golden eyes softened when he spoke, her head tilted as if she could see his soul. One evening, Jonas found himself speaking more than usual. "I've survived a long time because I had to," he said, staring into the fire. "People, they leave or they die. You learn to depend only on yourself." He glanced at her, half expecting her to scoff or shake her head, but she only walked closer and sat near him, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her voice was soft, musical, almost hypnotic. "Lonely hurts," she said. She didn't ask for explanations, didn't demand anything. She only stated it as fact, as though she knew the pain without needing to live it. Jonas felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent years believing he was untouchable, that emotions were weakness, and yet this strange alien girl had already pierced the walls he had built around himself. "Yeah," he whispered. "It does." They began a rhythm together, silent at times, connected in ways words could not describe. Jonas noticed that when she touched the fire to warm her hands, she would always glance at him, a faint question in her eyes. When he gathered water, she would quietly help, passing him the bottles with delicate efficiency. They didn't need words all the time. Their actions spoke volumes. Jonas started to trust her instinctively. She could survive in ways he never could. Her senses were sharper, her reflexes faster, her mind brilliant. And yet she was not superior in a way that frightened him. Instead, she complimented him, making him feel stronger, safer, and less alone. But it wasn't all comfort. The world outside was still dangerous, and Jonas's fear lingered in quiet corners of his mind. Sometimes he would catch her staring out into the frozen wasteland, and he wondered what she was thinking. Did she miss her home? Did she have one? Did she know how alone he had been? One night, a quiet storm blew in from the east. Snow battered the shelter, the wind screaming like a wild creature. Jonas felt panic rise in him, the kind that comes from knowing that survival is fragile. He looked at the girl. She sat calmly by the fire, hands resting on her knees, and for the first time, Jonas realized he envied her calmness. "You're not afraid," he said softly, his voice breaking. She looked at him with those golden eyes and shook her head slowly. "Afraid, yes, but trust, stronger." Jonas's chest tightened. She had no reason to trust him. She had no reason to stay. And yet she had. Every movement, every word, every glance told him one thing. She belonged here, not because of force, not because of ownership, but because she had chosen it. For the first time, Jonas realized something incredible. Humans survived not only because of strength, intelligence, or weapons. They survived because of trust, because of connection, because of the bonds they formed, fragile as they might be. And somehow in this cold, lonely shelter, this strange alien girl was teaching him what it meant to truly survive. Jonas swallowed hard. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if they would survive another week, another month. But in that moment, staring at the fire, listening to the wind, and feeling the quiet presence of the girl beside him, he understood something. Loneliness could be broken, fear could be softened, and hope. Hope could come from the most unexpected places. She had broken into his shelter. But more than that, she had begun to break into his life. And he knew deep in his bones that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning light was weak, barely reaching through the frost-streaked window. Jonas had been awake for hours, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. He had survived countless scavengers, raiders, and storms, but the world never got easier. Every day was a fight, and now he had a companion, a strange alien girl who had entered his life without permission, yet somehow felt like she had always belonged. He watched her quietly as she moved around the shelter, collecting small scraps of food and arranging the few supplies he had. She was careful, precise, her every gesture intentional. Jonas had never seen anyone work like that, so calm, so deliberate, so aware of everything around her. She didn't speak much, but her presence was enough to fill the silence, to soothe the long years of loneliness he had carried like armor. Then came the faint sound, soft at first, almost imperceptible over the howl of the wind. Jonas froze. Something was approaching. Something big. His instincts flared, adrenaline surging through him. "Stay close," he whispered to the girl, barely moving his lips. She nodded once, silent, and stepped closer. She didn't panic. She didn't hide. She only observed, her golden eyes glowing softly. Jonas could feel the tension radiating from her, but it was different from fear. It was readiness. The sound grew louder, mechanical, cold, and unyielding. Scavenger drones, no doubt. Machines designed to hunt, steal, destroy. Jonas tightened his grip on his rifle, his finger trembling slightly on the trigger. The girl didn't flinch. She only raised her hand slightly, almost as if testing the air. The first drone appeared, metal gleaming faintly under the weak sunlight. Its red sensors locked onto the shelter instantly. Jonas fired, but his bullets only scratched the surface of the machine. Another drone appeared behind it. Jonas cursed under his breath. He knew he couldn't hold them off alone. And then, she moved. It was subtle at first. A flick of her wrist, a shimmer of silver light that seemed to flow from her fingers. Jonas's eyes widened as the drone nearest to her sparked and shuddered violently. With another gentle gesture, it exploded silently, falling apart in pieces before hitting the ground. Another drone followed, and another, each one disabled with a simple, graceful motion of her hand. Jonas couldn't believe it. You did that?" he whispered, voice filled with awe and disbelief. She turned to him, her golden eyes steady. "Protect," she said simply. No explanation, no pride, no challenge. Just the one word. Protect. Jonas felt something shift inside him. Fear and awe mingled with a strange warmth, a sense of relief he hadn't known in years. This small alien girl who had entered his life without warning was now saving him from the impossible. And she did it without hesitation, without fear, without demand. The drones that remained retreated, whirring and scanning the area before disappearing over the horizon. Jonas sank to the ground, gripping his rifle tightly, shaking with adrenaline and disbelief. The girl crouched beside him, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. That small contact carried more comfort than anything he had known in years. Jonas exhaled slowly. He had survived countless dangers before, but never like this. Never with someone beside him who understood danger instinctively, who acted with precision, and who cared enough to protect him without question. His chest tightened as he realized how deeply he had come to rely on her presence in such a short time. The wind died down slightly, and silence returned. The shelter felt warmer now, though the fire was small and weak. Jonas looked at the girl, really looked at her for the first time since the battle. Her silver skin shimmered faintly in the firelight, her golden eyes calm, almost tender. She didn't boast, didn't act like a hero. She was simply there. And in that moment, Jonas understood something he hadn't allowed himself to think in years. He wasn't alone anymore. Not really. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have to fight only for himself. He had someone to fight for and someone fighting for him. He swallowed hard. "Thank you," he said quietly. She only smiled faintly and nodded. No words were needed beyond that. The trust, the bond, the unspoken understanding. It was all there. Stronger than any weapon, stronger than fear, stronger than the harsh world outside. For the first time, Jonas allowed himself to hope. Hope that maybe, together they could survive not just today but tomorrow, and maybe, just maybe, they could find something more than survival. Something like belonging, connection, and even home. Days after the drone attack, the shelter felt different. It wasn't just the warmth of the fire or the faint light spilling through the frost-streaked windows. It was something deeper, something Jonas hadn't felt in years. Trust. Connection. the subtle, fragile bond that had begun to form between him and the alien girl who had come into his life so suddenly. Jonas watched her quietly as she moved around the small space, organizing supplies, cleaning corners, and tending the fire with careful hands. Each movement was precise, deliberate, almost graceful, yet filled with quiet curiosity. She had begun to understand the rhythm of survival in this harsh world, mimicking his actions at first, then improving on them, making life in the shelter more bearable. Jonas felt a warmth he hadn't realized he was missing. Her presence filled the silence in a way nothing else ever could. He had never been one to talk about himself. Years of survival had taught him that words were dangerous, that emotions could betray weakness. But with her, it was different. He found himself speaking more freely, telling her about the long nights spent alone, about the storms he had survived, about the hunger, the cold, and the loneliness. She listened, her golden eyes unwavering, her expression soft and understanding. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge, she just listened, and in doing so she made him feel less invisible, less insignificant. One evening, as the twin moons rose outside, Jonas finally asked, "Do you have a home?" The question hung in the air. The girl tilted her head, her eyes thoughtful, as if she were choosing her words carefully. "Once, yes, but now, here," she said softly, gesturing to the shelter, to the fire, to him. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Her presence, her choice to stay, said enough. Jonas's chest tightened. He realized that she had no obligation to him, no reason to stay, yet she had chosen this small, cold shelter over the unknown dangers outside. She had chosen him. And somehow, that was the most human thing he had ever seen. He reached for a small piece of bread and handed it to her. She took it without a word, but her golden eyes met his, and in that glance he saw gratitude, trust, and even something he didn't expect: affection. His hand lingered slightly longer than necessary, and she didn't pull away. The bond between them grew with each passing day. They learned each other's rhythms, their silences becoming comfortable, their gestures communicating more than words ever could. When Jonas worked, she helped. When she moved, he noticed. When the cold pressed in, they shared the fire. Each act, each shared glance, built a foundation stronger than the walls of the shelter itself. Jonas had survived for years by relying only on himself, but with her, he discovered something new. He discovered that trust could be earned, that companionship could strengthen him, and that sometimes survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about sharing the burden with someone who cared as deeply as you did. One quiet night, the wind howling outside, Jonas sat by the fire staring into the flames. The girl sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, golden eyes reflecting the flickering light. "I thought I could survive alone," he whispered, voice rough. "I thought I didn't need anyone, but you've shown me something I forgot existed." She tilted her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "Hope, trust," she said softly. "Together. Stronger." Jonas felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so long alone, so long believing that relying on others was weakness, and now here she was, teaching him that strength could come from connection, that courage could come from trust, that hope could exist even in the coldest, darkest places. He reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her glowing face. She didn't move away. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, her presence comforting and warm, her gaze steady and unafraid. Jonas realized in that moment that she had done more than save his life once. She had saved him in ways he hadn't even known he needed. For the first time in years, Jonas allowed himself to feel something deeper than survival. He felt belonging. He felt connection. He felt hope. And most importantly, he felt that perhaps, with her by his side, he didn't have to face the cold, lonely world alone anymore. The shelter, once just a place of survival, had become something more. It was home, Not because of walls or fire, but because of the bond between two unlikely companions. And Jonas knew, deep in his bones, that no matter what dangers awaited outside, they would face them together. Weeks passed in the shelter, and Jonas began to realize something he hadn't expected. Life was easier with her here. The alien girl, Elia, as she had told him her name, moved through the small space with quiet confidence, her presence making the cold, harsh world outside seem less cruel. Jonas had spent years surviving alone, but now, every task, every routine, every flicker of firelight carried a new meaning. Elia was more than just a companion. She was clever, instinctive, and astonishingly quick. She could sense danger before he did, her movements sharp and precise when they were outside gathering supplies. Jonas had watched her leap across broken terrain, her hands brushing over frozen rocks and metal, every movement deliberate. He could not help but feel admiration, and something deeper, an emotional pull he hadn't felt in years. Inside the shelter, they fell into a rhythm. Jonas would gather water and food while Elia prepared and organized it. She had a strange way of noticing things he missed, arranging his meager supplies so they were easier to access. Sometimes she would teach him, showing a faster or safer method. And though he resisted at first, he found himself learning. Her presence was changing him, not just physically but emotionally. He was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to live. One evening, after a long day scavenging, they sat together by the fire. The twin moons reflected off her silver skin, giving her an ethereal glow. Jonas looked at her, finally daring to speak what he had kept in the quiet corners of his heart. I thought I had forgotten what it felt like to trust someone, he admitted, his voice low and raw. Elia tilted her head, her golden eyes studying him closely. Trust takes time, but worth it, she said softly. Her words were few, but they carried weight. They resonated in Jonas in a way no human words ever had. He realized that she was teaching him not only how to survive, but how to feel again. The bond between them grew stronger every day. When storms raged outside, they shared the fire, sitting close enough that warmth passed between them, more than just physical. When silence fell, they did not feel lonely. When danger approached, they moved together, instinctively protecting each other. Jonas began to understand something incredible. Strength was not just about weapons or speed. Strength could come from companionship, from trust, from the willingness to let someone stand beside you even when the world was trying to destroy you. One night, the wind howled like it never had before. Jonas shivered, feeling the bite of the cold creep into the shelter despite the fire. Elia, sitting across from him, noticed immediately. She extended her hand, and when Jonas hesitated, she touched his shoulder gently. He felt a warmth radiate through him deeper than the fire, deeper than any clothing or shelter could provide. Safe, she whispered. And in her presence, he felt it was true. Jonas realized how deeply he had come to rely on her. She had entered his life like a storm, unannounced and unexpected, yet she had brought clarity, hope, and courage. She had taught him that survival was not only about enduring pain and fear, but about embracing connection, about letting someone else help carry the burden. He found himself smiling more, speaking more, feeling more. Elia had opened a door in his heart he had long kept closed, a door that allowed warmth, laughter, and hope to enter. She had become his partner in every sense, not just for survival, but for life itself. As the night deepened, Jonas looked at Elia's glowing golden eyes and spoke quietly, almost to himself. I don't think I could survive. Not like this, without you. She reached for his hand, small and delicate, but with a strength that surprised him. Her eyes met his, steady, understanding, unafraid. Together, she said simply. And that word, simple and unadorned, carried more meaning than any declaration he had ever heard. For the first time in years, Jonas felt hope. not just for surviving another day or another storm, but for life beyond mere endurance. Together, he and Elia had created more than shelter. They had created trust, friendship, and the beginnings of something stronger, something that could survive even the cruelest world outside. Jonas leaned back, watching the fire dance in the small room, and realized that the alien girl who had broken into his shelter had done more than invade his home. She had broken through his loneliness, his fear, and his heart, and he knew deep in his bones that he would never be the same again. Months had passed since Elia first broke into Jonas's shelter. The harsh, frozen world outside had not grown any kinder, but inside the small haven something extraordinary had grown. Trust, hope, connection. Jonas no longer felt the crushing weight of loneliness, and neither did Elia. Together, they had survived storms, scavengers, and the unforgiving cold. Together, they had learned each other's rhythms, shared the burdens of survival, and found something stronger than fear: companionship. One morning, distant lights appeared on the horizon. Scouts from a nearby human colony were approaching. Jonas's heart leapt, but not entirely with relief. Humans often brought danger disguised as help. They would question Elia, her strange glowing eyes, her silver skin, and her strange powers. He feared what they might do if they saw her as a threat. He looked at Elia, who was watching him with calm, golden eyes. "They come," he said quietly. She nodded, her presence steady, unwavering. "Together," she replied, the single word carrying the weight of their shared months, their battles, their trust. The scouts arrived, cautious, weapons ready, expecting to find a lone survivor. Jonas stepped forward. Behind him, Elia stood silently, glowing faintly in the early morning light. The humans paused, staring at her, unsure of what to make of her alien form. Fear and curiosity warred in their expressions. Jonas raised a hand. "She's with me," he said firmly, his voice strong, unwavering. "She saved me. She protected me. She's one of us now." A murmur ran through the humans, but Jonas did not waver. He had learned something far more important than weapons or survival skills. He had learned the strength of trust, the power of connection, and the truth of what it meant to be human. Humans were remarkable not only because they endured, but because they could recognize courage, empathy, and loyalty, even in those who were not like them. Elia stepped forward slightly, not needing to speak. Her calm, golden gaze and gentle presence told the story better than any words could. She had chosen Jonas just as he had chosen her. She had proven that courage and compassion were universal, that heroism was not defined by species but by heart. The humans lowered their weapons, nodding cautiously. Jonas felt a swell of pride, not for himself but for humanity. For the human spirit that could recognize worth beyond appearances, that could honor courage, compassion, and choice. He turned to Elia and she smiled faintly, luminous and warm. Together they walked to the shelter side by side as the humans followed. Jonas knew that life would still be hard. The universe remained cold, dangerous, and unpredictable. But now he also knew that they were not alone, not truly. Not when trust and bravery could cross species. Not when hearts could connect in ways that defied fear. That night, as the twin moons rose over the frozen horizon, Jonas and Elia sat together outside the shelter, the fire casting dancing shadows across their faces. He looked at her, golden eyes shimmering, and whispered softly, "You belong here, not just because you stayed, but because you chose to." Elia tilted her head, her voice gentle. "We belong together." Jonas smiled, the warmth spreading from his chest to his limbs. For so long he had believed survival was everything, but now he understood survival was not just enduring. Survival was protecting, trusting, and loving. It was sharing burdens, standing side by side, and finding hope in the most unexpected places. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Jonas realized something extraordinary. Humanity was not just defined by strength, intelligence, or technology. Humanity was defined by courage, the courage to trust, the courage to love, the courage to see light even in the coldest darkness. Elia rested her head slightly on his shoulder. Jonas wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. The fire crackled, the wind whispered across the frozen land, and for the first time in years Jonas felt complete. The alien girl had broken into his shelter. She had acted like she belonged there, and in doing so, she had reminded him what it meant to be human, To survive was one thing. To shine, even in the darkest night, was something far greater. In that small, cold shelter, humanity had proven itself once again, not through weapons, not through brute strength, but through trust, compassion, and the unwavering light of the human heart. Jonas squeezed her hand gently. Together they faced the vast frozen world unafraid. Together they shone,